Hi, my name is Braden, and I'm an inspiring game designer and writer, and I'm quite obsessed with telling a good story. Stories have been with us for a long time now. Over the years, stories have evolved to the point where we have managed to create different storytelling mediums. Storytelling began in the form of text, words that are used to describe everything, the events, environment, and characters. And then, video cameras were invented, which allowed stories to be told in the form of motion pictures. Rather than relying on words, movies rely on visuals, cinematography, audio, and even color to tell their stories. And after that, the first ever video game was designed. Now, at the time, video games weren't exactly seen as a storytelling medium, but as time went by, stories in video games have started to become more and more standard. In fact, there are a lot of games out there today that focus more on their story than gameplay. For example, in Triangle Strategy, you'll find yourself going through dialogue more than you will be fighting in battles. Or in House of Ashes, you are able to decide what the characters say and what they can do, leading to all kinds of scenarios. But where's the appeal? Because telling a story through text, as well as visuals, has already been accomplished by books and movies. That's not to say that video game stories are bad or anything, it's just hard to see them stand out from the other two mediums. Heck, there's actually a game genre called visual novels. But what if I told you that there's actually an overlooked aspect to video game stories that kinda makes the medium fascinating? Well, it's true. Video games can gain an advantage in storytelling that books and movies don't have. While games may seem similar to that of books and movies, game stories are actually constructed quite differently compared to the other two mediums. Now you might be wondering, how exactly do video games compare to books and movies? Well, I think the key difference lies in the protagonist. The protagonist is a fancy word for the main character. They are the face of the story. And before we talk about how protagonists work in video games, I think it's important to know how protagonists traditionally work in books and movies to see how they compare to games. The first and obvious thing that a protagonist needs is a personality. Personality can help make your character interesting. After all, nobody wants to see a character go through some sort of journey when they have as much emotion as a plank of wood. A character's personality allows them to be unique, memorable, and even relatable. Especially when dealing with a whole cast of characters, personality can be really important. The next very important thing that a protagonist needs is a goal. What do they want to do? The goal could be anything. Well, anything that could suit the story, that is. Whether it's to slay a dragon or to fall in love with their desired partner. But characters also need a reason as to why they want to achieve this goal. This is where motivation comes in. Going back to our dragon example, our brave hero would have to have some sort of motive, because why would anyone in their right mind would want to go out of their way to go and kill a giant fire-breathing beast? Well, let's say that there is a massive cash prize for killing the dragon, and our hero needs that money in order to feed his family. That is a pretty strong motivation, something to encourage the protagonist to do something that they've never really done before. The next thing that a protagonist needs are flaws, specifically, flaws that interfere with the adventure that our protagonist is going through. While it may seem awesome to see the perfect human being just obliterate everything in its path, as it turns out, audiences find that kind of boring. Going back to our romance example, her goal is to get the partner that she wants, but her flaw is that she's socially awkward. This flaw gets in the way of the protagonist getting to her goal because obviously you have to interact with your potential partner in order to fall in love with them. But she can't always act this way. Not only does the protagonist need flaws, but they need to find a way to overcome those flaws. This is where the character arc comes into play. A character arc is the mental journey that the protagonist goes through on top of their physical journey. So for our socially awkward protagonist, let's say that she overcomes her flaw by, I don't know, occasionally talking to herself in the mirror. The rule of thumb with character arcs is that if the protagonist acts like a different person than who they were at the beginning of the story, then that's how you know you did a character arc correctly. And that's basically everything that a protagonist needs. Just to recap, a protagonist needs a personality in order to keep the audience engaged. They also need a goal as well as some sort of motivation that makes the protagonist want to achieve their goal. They also need flaws that interfere with the character's adventure, in addition to an arc that allows the protagonist to overcome those flaws. Now, I'm sure I missed a thing or two, but these 5 things are the most important aspects to all protagonists. Now with this little formula in mind, let's see how video game protagonists are structured in comparison to how they are in other mediums. And what better character to analyze than the most recognizable video game character of all time, Mario. To begin with, Mario is kind towards others close to him, but will act serious if the situation demands it. So, we have a personality. Check. Not only that, but Mario has a pretty clear goal too. In the beginning of most games, Princess Peach gets kidnapped by Bowser, and it's up to Mario to rescue her. So, we also have a goal. Check. However, this is where the checklist ends. Mario doesn't have much motivation. While you can come up with a couple, the motivation isn't made exactly clear. Plus, Mario doesn't have any flaws, and because of this, he also doesn't have a character arc. Mario is missing 3 out of 5 traits on our little formula, and it's not just Mario that's like this. Link, Sonic, Kirby, what else? Master Chief, Jill Valentine, Steve, I could go on and on. Although, this doesn't apply to every game protagonist. Like I said before, there are a lot of games that focus more on its story. Those are usually the kind of games where you can expect more complexity. But characters with a similar incomplete structure to Mario are still very common. Why is that? Well, this is where things get interesting. You see, Mario can't do everything on his own. Every single one of Mario's actions is influenced by the player, the person who's holding the controller. Every step, every jump, every accomplishment, as well as every slip-up is all done by the player. And at the beginning of the game, the player's knowledge of the game is quite limited, but the further they go, the more the player will learn about the game. This allows the player to face threats and pull off moves that seemed impossible before. All of this sounds pretty similar to that of a character arc. The player is the one who is flawed, and they're also the one who goes on the journey to overcome those flaws. So in a sense, the player is the protagonist. Everything that's been missing from Mario, the player is the one who fills the gaps. We are still missing motivation though, but I'll talk more about that later. But now knowing that the player is the protagonist, some game developers actually thrive off of this idea by removing the protagonist entirely. Allow me to explain. I would like to turn your attention to a little game called Space Pirate Trainer, an arcade-style game where you shoot robots that is played in virtual reality. Now, anyone who has played this game would be quick to tell you that this game has no story at all. And to an extent, they are right. There's no written plot for this game. Not only that, but we have very little information about our protagonist, even less than Mario. All we have is a little tutorial screen that shows us what we look like, as well as a voice grunt that suggests that we're male. But apart from that, we have no idea who this character is as a person. But it's not until I actually begin playing the game where everything changes. All of a sudden, every single question I have regarding the protagonist vanishes, because the protagonist is meant to be you. You are the warrior who is ready to shoot at robots, and the robots are out to shoot you as well. The robots are out for your blood, and they will do anything in their power to take you down. Thus, you get the sense that you are part of the conflict. This is what's called immersion. And immersion is the key advantage that games have that books and movies don't. It's your experience that is the story. According to ARM, immersive gaming is achieved through a good game flow, a fully developed storyline, and cutting-edge graphics, in addition to full-body experiences, as well as augmented realities and virtual realities. And they're certainly not wrong about this. Actually, I would like to add that the first-person camera is probably the most important factor in immersive gaming. These are the main factors that allow games to be more immersive than others. Remember, the player is the protagonist. So all games need immersion in at least some capacity in order to make their stories work. But obviously, not all games can be a first-person, full-body experience of virtual reality. But how can something like a flat-screen third-person game gain immersion? And while immersion certainly has some appeal to it, why is immersion so important? Well, let's start with the how. Up until this point, I've been primarily talking about character structure and not once about game storylines themselves. After all, ARM did mention that fully developed storylines are an immersion factor. Even though it may not look like it, it's the plot, the world building, and the non-playable characters that allow these non-immersive games to gain their immersion. Remember, the player is the protagonist. Therefore, the player is part of the game world. And the player really gets the sense of this, because games allow you to make an impact on the game world. But why is this all important? Well, remember how the game protagonist is still missing motivation? Well, immersion is what gives us that motivation. Because the player is technically part of the game world, naturally they are going to want to save it. Or escape it. The player gets a sense that they're part of the world because they're making an impact. Yes, even though you're just pushing buttons, you feel like you're making an impact. Isn't it funny how the brain works? Furthermore, many games like to fill their storylines with mystery to act as motivation for the player. What's up with these giant rings that are floating in space? What are these scientists studying? How did I receive a letter from someone who has passed away? These are all intriguing questions to be sure, and when games allow us to ask our own questions, we feel like we're going on an adventure to search for answers. Therefore, the player is immersed, therefore, they're motivated to engage with the story. We're now approaching the end of this little video. I know that this was a lot of information to digest, so let's quickly summarize it. Video games can gain an advantage in storytelling that books and movies don't have. While most video game protagonists are missing the information that all book and movie protagonists have, it's the player that fills out the gaps. We also learn that the player is the protagonist, whether it's in the form of being in the shoes of a character or a game allows you to be the hero of the story. We also covered immersion and how it's the key factor in game storytelling. At the end of the day, books and movies tell you about an adventure, while video games allow you to be part of it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this interesting.